Hey, this is Robbie Baseball from the Dingers Fantasy Baseball Podcast, and you are listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 192, Catch Me If You Can, movie review. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. Now, this episode, we're going to be going back and taking a look at the 2002 Steven Spielberg film, Catch Me If You Can, with Leonardo DiCaprio. But before we get to the movie review, Derek, what is new in the world of pop culture for you, my friend?
Hey, Chris. Well, after a few shows where I don't really feel that I've had a lot to contribute in this particular segment of the show, I've got a lot to contribute in this segment of the show this week.
Oh, you had a lot of spare time, I guess, on your hands.
Well, yeah, let's say yes.
Okay, that's cool.
I had some time. Well, let's not say spare time. I managed to find the time to enjoy some pop culture offerings. I'm going to start with a documentary.
For 40 days and 40 nights, he watches documentaries. He likes to learn about the world. It's Derek's Documentaries. Derek's Documentaries.
Go ahead. What documentary did you watch?
You know, I haven't done a doc in a couple of weeks, and I sort of missed the song.
I missed the song, too.
Yeah. All right. So this one just dropped on Netflix this week. My wife forced me to sit down and watch it, and I sort of have mixed feelings about it. It's called Attack of the Hollywood Cliches. Have you heard about this one at all?
No, it's on Netflix?
Yes. So it's a very sort of tongue-in-cheek look at these. It's hosted by Rob Lowe, and they identify 15 or so very common Hollywood cliches. They show examples from movies you know. They interview various critics and movie creators and actors and get their ideas and their thoughts on them. It's very loosey-goosey, tongue-in-cheek, but it's spot on the money. Like every cliche they identify in here are absolutely correct. And they show you, like, in some cases, like 3, 4, 5 clips in a row of movies that do it over and over and over again. And, you know, in a lot of them, they had the one like with the car chase cliche. They didn't say fruit stand, but it was basically, they talked about how there's always a bunch of debris and things they get crashed into. And the 2 or 3 examples they showed, it was like fruit stand. It was fruit stand, flower stand. I was like, oh, see, look, this is one of Chris's, fruit stand. So yeah, it was just okay. I mean, because it's sort of trying to be a little tongue-in-cheek and not take itself super seriously, because it's obviously talking about cliches, which the way they're identifying it is like this sort of very, you know, wink kind of thing. I didn't love it. It was interesting. It runs like 55 minutes. So I mean, I think that's a perfect length. I think if it was any longer than that, I probably would have turned it off. But you know, give it 5 or 10 minutes. You'll realize right away if it's for you or not. But it's on Netflix, and it's not bad. It's called Attack of the Hollywood Cliches. Okay. So that was my documentary, and then I got a couple others. So not documentaries. These are so I got a movie and a TV show. So the movie I watched was a classic, Sergio Leone directing Clint Eastwood in Fistful of Dollars.
Ah, the old spaghetti westerns. Very cool. So
the 3 films. The Clint Eastwood films, Man with No Name, the Westerns by Leone, were on the Turner Classic Movies a couple of weeks ago, and I just set up my record to record all 3 because I've never seen any of them. And it's not because I'm, you know, for no particular, I haven't been avoiding them. It's just, you know, I've never got around to watching them. This is perfect. So I watched Fistful of Dollars. Again, I didn't know anything about any of these movies other than Clint Eastwood's in them.
Did you like it?
I loved it. It was
nice.
Great. Yes. It's like, it was so good. I watched Fistful of Dollars and I loved it. And then I'm about halfway through the next one, which is for a few dollars more, which I'm enjoying immensely, but it's much longer. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I'm about halfway through that one. I'm enjoying that. So I'll get through that by next week. But yeah, no,
and the last one is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
which I've heard fantastic things about my whole life, and I've never seen it, but it's a really long one too. It's over 3 hours.
Yeah.
So I've got to carve out some time to finish watching these. But yeah, Fistful of Dollars was great. If you've never seen it, I mean, you've seen it, but to the listeners, if you've never seen it, it was good. It's about an hour, 45 minutes, so it's not too long. And it's a very simple plot. Again, I don't really want to ruin it because it's best to just go in not knowing anything. And Clint Eastwood's great in this. It was really good. I really enjoyed it.
Cool.
I definitely give it an A.
Now,
the last one is I started watching this new TV show on Netflix. It dropped last week. It's a Korean television series called Squid Game. Have you ever heard about it, Chris?
No.
Probably not. But okay, so the trailer dropped like a month ago, and when my wife and I saw it, we were like, wow, this looks like this show could be great. So we had it flagged.
Squid Game.
Squid Game. So yeah, we flagged it in our Netflix to say, like, when this comes out, notify us. So sure enough, when it dropped this weekend, it showed up as recommended for you because you flagged it. And so we're like, oh, well, we should watch that. And then I didn't get around to watching it the first couple of days, and my social media feed exploded. Like, it was all over all these blogs and all these podcasts I listen to. Everyone's talking about it. It's so great. Oh my God, you got to watch this thing. And I was like, okay, I don't want to ruin this for myself. So I didn't read anything. And I finally, last night before I went to bed, I thought, okay, I'll watch the first episode and see what it's like. Well, I ended up watching 5 episodes. I fell asleep during the 5th episode. It was like 3 a.m. I had to finally turn it off and go to sleep. And tonight, after we're done the pod, I'm going to finish watching the rest of it. It was fantastic. It's super good. Sort of very high level. It's basically, think Hunger Games. It's a bunch of people that sign up to literally play these games to win cash money. But what they don't realize, and this is in the trailer and happens very early in the first episode, is once you are eliminated from the game, you get killed. Like, it's life and death. And so that's why they have the potential to win so much money. And it's super good. I'm enjoying it immensely. The reviews have been outstanding. It is in Korean, so it is going to be subtitled, but Netflix does offer a dubbed version in English if you prefer to see it that way. It's 9 one-hour episodes. Squid Game. Give it a check out. Just watch the first episode. It starts a little slow, but by about halfway through, you can sort of see like where it's going. And by the end of the first episode, if you're not hooked, then you're probably not going to really dig it. But yeah, it was quite good.
Very cool.
So those are my 3 for this week.
I got something for you, Derek. You're going to be very proud of me, I hope. I also watched a documentary this week. And not only did I watch a documentary, I think I watched one of Derek's documentaries. Because I think a few months ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you mentioned a documentary called Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street.
No, there was one that was, I think it was called the 50 Years of Sesame Street or something.
Okay.
They did 2 or 3 Sesame Street documentaries recently, but I know the one you're talking about. Yeah. I have not seen it yet.
So I had some time this week and I watched it. Wow, it was fantastic. So I've mentioned before, Sesame Street is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. Like, it's educational, it's entertaining, it's diverse and inclusive. It's quite simply one of the greatest shows in the history of television. And the behind the scenes stuff in this, like, I've always thought that what the puppeteers did was some of the best work in television of all time. The characters that they created by like Jim Henson and like Frank Oz and Carol Spinney and even Richard Hunt and Fran Brill, like some of the stuff they did was better than anything live actors could have done. Like, and then what they delved into in this documentary was stuff like the way that the show handled issues like death. Like when Mr. Hooper died and Big Bird couldn't understand what death was. And my wife is like, she's crying when she's watching this, like it was just, it was so good. And then like, it was a good documentary in the sense that it was really cool to see how this show came together, basically against all odds. Like, I mean, how they ever got this show off the ground in the first place was just amazing, and the fact that it's endured for so long, I think it's a magical show. And I've mentioned before, me and my sons, we've gone back and watched like the old stuff from the 70s. It's all on YouTube. And my sons just love it, and of course it has one of my favorite characters of all time, Cookie Monster, which I just love. And like what Frank Oz does with that character, it's like physical comedy. It's like a study of the human id. It's, I don't know. It's such a good show. So it was really, really cool to kind of peel back the curtain and see what goes on, behind this show. But I remember you had mentioned about a Sesame Street documentary, and I thought it was this one. But either way, I watched this one, and it was just fantastic. At the very least, it triggered me to kind of watch it, like, because you were mentioning the Sesame Street thing. So it kind of made me watch it. So in return, maybe I should give you this.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
All right, Derek, got a knock-knock joke for you this week. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right, knock-knock.
Who's there?
Go f*** yourself. You see what I did there?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Like
Nicely done.
I wanted to incorporate the movie. Yeah?
Yeah. Nicely done.
Just say it.
Say what?
Go f*** yourself. I've got a can, so I'm opening this up right now.
And I'm a girl drink drunk, so I'm having a Pop Shop cream soda.
Oh, that's a good one.
That has Chris's stamp all over it. Yeah, okay. Oh.
You mean The Phantom Menace?
Oh!
I'm not a fan of the prequels.
Okay, fair enough.
I used to be a somewhat successful podcaster in the world of fantasy baseball.
Go Ducks!
Oh man.
Okay, my friend, last week we took a look at movies based on real life, and we did our personal top 5 lists of movies that we felt were the best of that genre of film. And then at the end of the show, I was all set to throw things over this week. We were gonna do another round of our pop culture fantasy draft. I was all about to ask you about, what year you wanted to draft from. I was all excited to try and beat the tar out of you again at another round of our fantasy draft. And then you called an audible at the end of the show, and you wanted to go another way for this week. So we've pushed our fantasy draft off until next week. And in the meantime, I guess it's safe to say that you were inspired by our topic last week, and you had a movie based on real life that you really wanted me to watch. So tell me, Derek, a little bit about why you felt it was important, not only that we go back and watch Catch Me If You Can, but also like why you pushed off our fantasy draft. I mean, I was really looking forward to it. It's two of my favorite things in the whole world. So, so why this movie? Why do we need to go back and watch this movie?
So I'll start by answering those in reverse order.
Okay.
So we are definitely committed to doing our fantasy draft of the 1980s, and that's great. And we know a lot of our listeners love the 1980s and the pop culture from the 1980s. You and I included among those people. But I do know that we have some listeners that are part of the younger audience and maybe are not as nostalgic for the 1980s as you and I are.
No.
And I certainly don't want to alienate them or make them feel like they got to start skipping shows, because I've talked to a few of my friends that are listeners and they've told me straight up, if you guys review a movie that either I've never heard of or that I know I didn't like, I just don't listen to that episode. And that kind of bums me out a little bit, but I get it. And so I know that there's probably going to be times when that happens for our, the general listeners. So I didn't want to get us stuck in the 80s over and over and over and over and over and potentially lose listeners who realize like, hey, I've skipped 6 shows in a row. Forget it. I'm just going to not listen to them anymore. Because if you're a listener, we appreciate it. And we thank you for listening. And we hope you're enjoying the show. And we want to keep doing shows that you are going to enjoy. So that was a big part of why at the last second, I thought, you know what? Instead of doing 80s draft, 80s movie, 80s movie, 80s draft, 80s movie, let's throw something out of left field in there. So that was what inspired me to just call that audible and say, we're going to do a movie this week instead. And it was going to be something a little newer. Now, 2002 is not necessarily new compared to where we are right now, but it's certainly newer than the 80s. Mm-hmm. So that was the reason why I sort of thought I'm going to throw a movie out there. And part of the reason I picked this movie was I almost included it in my list last week. Mm-hmm. But while I was putting my list together last week, this is when I sort of had this epiphany that I just described. And when this movie came up on my list to possibly include, I thought, you know what, this would probably be a better movie to do a review on and give a full, half an hour, 45 minutes to talking about, rather than just give it the 2 seconds or the 2-minute thing on a top 5 list and go, well, this is my number 4 pick and this is why I like it, rah, next. Because this movie has a lot, in my opinion, this movie has a lot to like about it. It's got a great cast. It's got a great director in Steven Spielberg. It's got interesting characters. It's got I love a movie that has anything to do with like a con artist or Prison Break or mobster movies. Like there's time travel. Like there are certain I don't want to call them, well, I guess to be cliches or subgenres that I love. And this one has the con man. Like this is, it's literally called Catch Me If You Can, where the guy's pretending to be somebody he's not, and it's this wish fulfillment of like, don't you really wish we could all do that and just pretend to be someone I'm not and be successful and make money? Like he ended up stealing like $4 million in real life in the 60s and 70s. Like that was some big money. I mean, not that it's not big money today, but so no, I thought, let's watch this. And then you had mentioned that you'd never seen it before, which was surprised me a little bit, but also at the same time, I find that when you haven't seen the movie, that usually makes for a better discussion. So I was very pleasantly surprised when you said you had not seen it. I really hope you enjoyed it, but we'll find out in a few minutes and we'll break down the movie in a little more detail. So that's sort of the roundabout long answer of why we did this week.
Well, like I said, you pushed off our pop culture fantasy draft. So there was a lot of pressure on this movie to be great. And you know what? It was just okay for me.
Okay. I can take okay.
For a lot of reasons. Now, first of all, you made us push off our fantasy draft. So there's that. And the second thing is, this movie is directed by, one of the greatest directors of all time. I don't know if you know, this was actually supposed to be directed by David Fincher originally.
Yeah, I'd read that in the notes, yeah.
He's your Hollywood boyfriend, isn't he? Oh, no, that's Matt Damon.
Matt Damon.
But I know you love David Fincher.
You can have 2 Hollywood boyfriends, or 3, or 4, or 5. There's no limit.
So the fact that this is directed by Spielberg kind of stood out to me because, I don't know, I feel like this film was more on the spectrum with like 1941 and Always, as opposed to like Raiders, Jaws, Jurassic Park. So Derek, let's just start with that. Where would you rank this film on Spielberg's list of films? Because I read somewhere online that this is like his 3rd highest rated film on Rotten Tomatoes, which is like someplace where millennials go to rate movies.
Yeah, I think so. I understand what you're saying. From a technical, artistic perspective through the director's eye kind of viewing of this, it may not stand out as much as, say, Jaws or Schindler's List or Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like some of Spielberg's movies, whether you love or hate the movie, you have to give a certain amount of admiration and appreciation to the artistry that the director brings to it. And this is sort of something we talked about with Raging Bull, where I did not enjoy Raging Bull at all, but I thought the direction was outstanding. And I find that with many directors, like I may not enjoy the movie, but I can appreciate what the director brings to the table. And this one maybe is a little bit backwards to that, where I love the movie, but I don't necessarily love, like over the top love what Spielberg did, which is not to say I think he did a bad job, but I didn't really get the sense that this had like the Spielberg A game. It almost felt a little like he was phoning it in. Like, he was just, giving it his middle of the road effort, which, hey, when Spielberg gives you a middle of the road effort, that's still going to be better than just about the rest of the field combined anyway. So I'll take it.
Yeah. Good point. Oh, one interesting note I should mention. The movie is obviously based on Frank Abagnale Jr. And I met him one time. So.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Was he trying to pass off a bad check?
No, surprisingly enough. It was quite a few years ago. I worked, when I was in the corporate world, I worked for a document destruction equipment company. And I went to this big convention in Las Vegas for NAID. It was the National Association of Information Destruction. And I went there and I led this seminar, and the keynote speaker was Frank Abagnale Jr. because he was talking about fraud and identity theft. And this guy he's led one hell of a life. That's for sure. But a little bit about the movie. So not to be confused with the movie of the same name from 1989 with Jeffrey Lewis, which was about illegal street racing in Minnesota. Catch Me If You Can, 2002, like we said, directed by Steven Spielberg. All-star cast, which I think we should get to in a second.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Really good cast. It was made for $52 million, which seems high to me. There's not a ton of special effects or huge sets they had to build. Although I think
that was mostly salary, if I had to guess.
Oh, that's a good point, because one thing I noticed when it comes to their sets, the Miami airport, it felt like that was like rebuilt, just for the exterior shots. So maybe they spent money on that. But yeah, good point. Probably spent a lot of money on salaries. But the movie made money. It grossed over 164 million just domestically. Now, the thing was, I always like to look at the box office and just see where it stands. But it was released on Christmas Day in 2002. Yes. So it made 64 million of its overall gross before the new year. So it's kind of hard to compare it, from year to year. Mm-hmm. But if it had been grossed all of its 164 million in 2002, it would have made it into the top 10. It would have beat out A Beautiful Mind and Scooby-Doo and stuff like that. But it would have been behind movies like Spider-Man and Attack of the Clones and My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And by the way, we mentioned 1984 recently. Mm-hmm. I think you could safely say that 2002 wasn't the strongest year for movies.
No, not based on the titles you just read out.
Exactly. No. They were at the top. But if this movie had come out, a month later and it grossed all of its money the next year, 2003, it still would have finished in the top 10. So it still did good. But man, if 2002 was a bad year for movies, take a look at 2003. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, The Matrix Reloaded, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, X-Men 2, Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, Bad Boys 2, Matrix Revolutions.
Those are all sequels.
Every one of those movies
Too Furious. All sequels.
That's all sequels. Just so stupid. Oh man, all of it sequels. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the cast of this film.
Sure.
Like I said, it was definitely an all-star cast. But I have a question for you, because I kept thinking about this as I watch it. Do you think this movie could have worked with a cast of unknown actors? Because I kept thinking that as I watched it.
I think that the two primary roles of Frank Abagnale Jr. and Carl Hanratty, the FBI agent played by Tom Hanks, who's trying to catch him, I think those two roles, you needed movie stars in this role, because I think without that, you weren't going to get bums in seats. And I mean, Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio in 2002 were certainly A-plus listers at that point. So you knew there was going to be people walking through the door just because their name was on the marquee. I do think the movie could have worked. I don't think it would have been nearly as successful. I think it would have been the kind of movie that people would have found on home video and streaming services like years later. And then they would have looked back on and people would be like, well, how did we miss this when it came out? But I think if you had an unknown cast, you wouldn't have been able to, I don't think Steven Spielberg would have been willing to make it with a lesser cast. And if the studio had committed to not using big names, maybe as a way to save money, I don't think Spielberg would have attached his name to it. I mean, I don't know, but I'm guessing. So I think that it's sort of a package deal. You want Spielberg to direct, you're going to put some A-listers in there. And if you want to do it as more of a little smaller independent kind of film, you get, then you can do those unknown actors. And I think if it was unknowns, the person who played Frank Abagnale Jr., this would have been a great opportunity for them, because every time he changes identity, he's pretend to be someone else. So it's an actor playing a role of a character who's pretending to be other people. So it's like pretending to pretend, it's that whole Victor Victoria thing. It's a man pretending to be a woman, pretending to be a man kind of thing. So yeah, it's, I think so long answer, yes, I think it could have worked, but I think there would have been some other issues. Okay, so Leonardo DiCaprio, we'll start with him. His breakout role obviously was Titanic, but I always say that he never really got his due, for that movie, because the accolades in that movie went to Kate Winslet and Gloria Stewart. Like, DiCaprio wasn't nominated for an Oscar as Jack Dawson. Well, but that was a strong actor year, to be fair. Yeah, true. He still should have been nominated. But I mean, he's gone on to become one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. So, absolutely. So my question for you, Derek, is this: what do you think is Leonardo DiCaprio's best movie performance? I mean, he won an Oscar for The Revenant, but you could argue that was just kind of a makeup Oscar, for his body of work. It was probably one of the most physically demanding roles of all time, but still, I don't know. I'm assuming you've seen most of his films. So what do you think is his best performance in your opinion? I'll be honest. I am not a fan of Leonardo DiCaprio. Okay, fair enough. I mean, nothing against him personally. I've never been a fan of his work, which is not to say that he's not talented. I can certainly recognize, when an artist puts forth the effort. I I don't know. I would think, but I have seen a lot of his movies. I would think maybe, geez. I mean, I thought he was quite good in The Departed, but there's a lot of other things going on with that one. Maybe I would either say Gangs of New York or maybe even Inception. I don't know. That's a hard question. I never really gave it a lot of thought. Although he's in Django Unchained too, and he plays a despicable character in that one. But
so I think when I look at this kind of thing, like I always gravitate toward which performance is the most memorable. So for me, I think it would come down to What's Eating Gilbert Grape, Titanic, and Django Unchained. And
actually,
probably
sorry, Chris,
in that order.
Let me interrupt you. Sorry, I'm just looking through. I'm scrolling through his IMDb right now. Totally blanked on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood from a couple years ago with Quentin Tarantino. Yep. That's definitely his best work, without question. I'm changing my answer.
All right, fair enough. I don't even have that on mine. Christopher Walken. Is there anything that this guy does that he's not outstanding in? He's like a legend. I think
he's so good.
I think he might be the single most unique actor in the history of Hollywood. You know, like I like the old stuff. You know that, right? Like, so I personally feel his best work was in stuff like Annie Hall and The Deer Hunter and Pulp Fiction. And did you ever see his appearances on Saturday Night Live, especially back in the 90s? Oh, that is some of the funniest stuff ever in the history of that show. I remember he did a parody of The Dead Zone. Remember that movie, The Dead Zone, he was in back in the 80s?
I know of it. I don't think I ever saw it.
It was based on a Stephen King novel. And the idea was, it was this guy, whenever he touched somebody, he could foresee their future. And it was like bad things happening to them. And in this SNL sketch, he would like grab someone's hand and then predict like this mundane stuff. He was like this trivial psychic, I think they called it.
Okay.
So he'd like grab the hand of the girl at the water cooler in the office. And he's like, oh my God, your housekeeper, she just waxed the floor of your kitchen. And your daughter was running in the kitchen. And the girl's like, oh my God, is my daughter, is she okay? And he's like, she ran on the waxed floor. It left footprints. Your housekeeper had to wax it again. And the girl's like, okay, who cares? I'll call her later. Like, it was just, and then remember when your brother Mark was on the show and I played the drums for him and he's like, it needs more cowbell.
Yes.
There was that sketch.
That was him too.
Yeah, like it's such staying power.
And the prescription is more cowbell.
I don't know. Christopher Walken's amazing. I love him.
And so some of his more recent stuff that I enjoy, again, some of it is sort of guilty pleasure stuff, but some of it's just great. You mentioned Pulp Fiction, again, small role, very memorable. We did the movie review of True Romance not too long ago. He's got a small part in that, and he's fantastic in that scene with Dennis Hopper. And he was in one of the more recent remakes of the movie Hairspray, and you get to see him do a little singing and dancing. He was good in that, again, small part. And there was this is a guilty pleasure movie. There was a movie he was in with Brendan Fraser and I want to say Sissy Spacek, and it was called Blast from the Past. And he plays the dad in that movie. And if I can find this movie, I may have to get you to watch it. But again, it's a sort of quirky role, but he was pretty good in that too. I mean, and of course he's got the Fatboy Slim Weapon of Choice.
Weapon of Choice.
The tap dancing, and they got him on the wires. It's just like, oh my God. You know me, I'm a music video guy. That definitely makes my top 20 all-time music videos, no question. Maybe even breaks the top 10, but yeah, it's just he's so good in so many things, and he's clearly talented. Yeah, and again, he's got a small part in this, but nothing wrong with a small part.
No.
What do they say? No small parts.
No small parts. Only small. The scene in the restaurant, he improvised a lot of that when he got all emotional and started crying and stuff. That wasn't really in the script, and just such a great actor. Tom Hanks, I want to mention, because the first question I have, Derek, is what the hell was the accent that Hanks was using in this movie?
Yeah.
Was it from Boston? Or like somewhere in the Northeast or something?
Yeah, it threw me for a little bit as well. I don't know. I don't know where given what we know of Tom Hanks' work ethic, I've got to think that this was a deliberate choice Whether it's maybe he's trying to emulate the real Carl Hanratty, because obviously it's based on a real person. Maybe he met him.
It's not actually. It wasn't actually. There was no Carl Hanratty. Carl Hanratty is a fictional character that was kind of a mishmash,
like an amalgamation.
Yes, of a bunch of different FBI guys that kind of were chasing him. So this character didn't really exist. He sort of existed in spirit, sort of. But I don't know where the accent was from. It was an unusual choice. I don't necessarily think it really helped or hurted the performance, but it certainly helped separate Tom Hanks's performance in this from, say, his performances in other movies where he just uses his regular speaking voice. I personally felt that Tom Hanks was kind of miscast here.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
He seemed like an odd choice to play this part. Like, he was also miscast as Robert Langdon too, I think.
Oh, big time.
I think Tom Hanks is great. I mean, hell, he was in Splash and Bachelor Party. So, I mean, I love the guy. But I thought Forrest Gump was dumb. And
what?
Oh, I didn't like Forrest Gump.
Dude.
Oh, yeah.
What's wrong with you?
We'll have to get into that in another episode. But I don't think Tom Hanks is the most versatile actor in the world. I mean, he's been good in some roles.
Sure.
And he's been not good in some roles. I thought he was great in Saving Private Ryan and Philadelphia.
Well, Castaway. The movie's just him for an hour. Like, come on. It takes a powerhouse to do that.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know. I just feel like he was miscast here. That's
no, I do agree with that. I think that he was miscast. And I mean, I didn't dislike his performance, but I don't necessarily felt that he brought something to the table that another actor couldn't have done. Maybe not the same way, but in a way that I would have felt just as satisfied.
But I got to tell you, the one thing about his role, that knock knock joke.
Oh yeah.
I laughed out loud. I almost fell off the couch. I was laughing so much. And then when he did it again with his boss.
Yeah. But they just had to do the setup. He just said knock knock, and then they cut away. You knew where it was going.
You knew where it was going. And then when I did it at the beginning of the podcast, oh man, that was awesome.
Now I think, and I may be wrong here, but Tom Hanks has that sort of, everyman quality, the trim, the clean cut. Like I don't remember him ever swearing in a movie before this. And I think that was part of the reason that it worked so well, is because he doesn't swear in his movies generally.
That's a good point. Even when you think of like Bachelor Party, which is an R-rated comedy and is like as raunchy as you can get, I don't think he ever swore in it. That's a really good point.
I think that was part of the reason that it worked so well, is because if it wasn't the first time, it had to be the first time in a long time that he used the F word on camera, and it worked. It's great. I was talking to one of my friends and I mentioned we were doing this, and now I go, we're doing Catch Me with the Hand, and he goes, knack, knack. And I was like, yeah, we're getting there. Don't worry about it. And then of course he yells the punchline at me, and I'm like, funny.
Amy Adams, I want to mention, because I love Amy Adams. I love Amy Adams too. So for me, what separates an actor from a quote unquote movie star is the charisma that they bring to the screen. And whenever Amy Adams is on screen in any movie, you just can't take your eyes off of her. And this was one of her first film roles, if not her very first. I mean, she was doing a lot of dinner theater up until then. She was doing Brigadoon on stage when she was working on this movie, which is near and dear to my heart, Derek, because one of my first theater roles that I ever did as an actor was a production of Brigadoon. Actually, Amy Adams and I both played the part of Fiona, surprisingly enough. So there's that. But I don't know. It was funny. She did this movie and then she didn't work for a little while. Like it took her a little while to catch on. It wasn't until she did Junebug and she was nominated for an Oscar that she started to really work consistently. But one thing that I thought was interesting about her in this movie is she's supposed to play a 16-year-old girl, and she's like 30 years old.
Yeah, I was just looking that up. She was born the same year I was. Actually, only born a couple of weeks before me. So she would have been, let's see, this came out in 2002. So she would have been, 27 or 28, depending on when the movie was shot. And she's playing like, a 17, 18-year-old? Yeah, like it's... And you believe it. I mean, she certainly has, between the way they've got her made up and they give her the braces, and it's like, and obviously she's able to convince you through her performance. I love her. I think she's great. We did on a much earlier podcast. I had you watch the movie Arrival, which is one of my favorites. I know you didn't care for the movie, but I got to think that I was shocked that she wasn't nominated for an Oscar for that movie, as were I think a lot of other people. And I think she's one of these performers that in the years to come will get the due that she deserves. And I think she's been nominated she's been nominated 6 times for an Academy Award. She'll win one. Don't kid yourself. In the next decade, she'll have at least one under her belt. And she's making a lot of smart decisions in more recent years. Obviously everybody does a job for a paycheck. She plays Lois Lane in the DC Comics movies, but she makes some good choices along the way. So
Martin Sheen, I thought, was really good too. The guy is amazing. I mean, he was in Apocalypse Now. He was the president. Yeah, on West Wing, right? And he's got his 2 sons are Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez. And in this movie, how about those teeth that he had? Those fake teeth. He's like the stereotypical American dad in this movie. Yeah. He doesn't care about Leonardo DiCaprio at all until he learns that he's a lawyer, right? And a
Lutheran.
And a Lutheran, of course. And he doesn't believe him, right? He thinks he's lying. But instead of calling him out, and saying, "Oh, you can't marry my daughter," no, he connects with him. It's an amazing performance. Oh, I wanted to say there was a few cameos from actors that have been other stuff that before this, or maybe they went on to do other things, like Ellen Pompeo. This was before Old School or Grey's Anatomy. Elizabeth Banks, Jennifer Garner. I like how in her scene she plays this seasoned woman who's gonna take him for his money, and she ends up getting taken for like $400, which I thought was cool.
Yeah. I knew that. I did remember that there were cameos from both men and women that you're like, that had like small parts, but I hadn't seen this movie in a while. So Ellen Pompeo shows up as a stewardess. I'm like, oh my God, she's so young in this, like clearly pre Grey's Anatomy. I remembered Elizabeth Banks being in this, but again, I didn't really remember her part. I had no memory of Jennifer Garner being in this whatsoever. So as even, I totally forgot Martin Sheen played the father of the girl. So it's like, there's a lot of performers in this that when you see them, you're like, oh my God, this person's in this.
It's funny. I was watching this with my wife, and she was like, Jennifer Garner hasn't done a whole lot. And I was like, you're right. She hasn't. And like, she was in that show Alias on TV, which probably got her this role. But other than that, she hasn't done a ton of work, in Hollywood. I think she's just been more kind of just private and reclusive. I don't know. But the one scene I want to mention, DiCaprio, when he goes into that fancy hotel and he's talking to the hotel concierge at the front desk, I recognize the actor immediately when this scene. He was in Trading Places. He played one of Winthorpe's snobby buddies at the country club, Todd.
Oh, I don't remember.
Remember the scene at the beginning of Trading Places where it's like, looking good, Lewis. Feeling good, Todd.
I remember the scene, but I can't picture the actor.
The guy that played Todd was the concierge. Okay. I noticed him right away. I was like, oh my God, he's from Trading Places. And then I also recognized Margaret Travolta, John Travolta's sister. Not Ellen Travolta, the one from Joni Loves Chachi, but Margaret Travolta, his other sister. She was in a scene too. So there's lots of like smaller like parts that had actors in it. I thought was pretty cool. So one thing I wanted to mention, when the movie starts off, they open up with this old episode of To Tell the Truth from the 70s.
Yes.
And I love how they intercut actual footage of the game show with footage of DiCaprio playing Abagnale. I thought that was really cool because there's Kitty Carlisle's on the panel. Joe Garagiola is like the host. He used to be a panelist on that show, and then they made him a host after Gary Moore got sick. Actually, that show also, I remember it kept coming back because in the 90s, Robin Ward, the Canadian, I met that guy once. He was the host of it for a bit. And remember John O'Hurley, Peterman from Seinfeld? Yep. He did a version of the show. And then there's a new one with Anthony Anderson, I think it is. My wife loves that version with Anthony Anderson. She makes me watch it all the time. It's kind of a neat concept for a game show. But anyway, like I say, I really liked how they incorporated the old footage with kind of the new footage. Pretty cool. Yeah. That was,
I like that. I mean, I'm not I'm not usually a fan of the kind of movie where it's like you get the ending at the beginning and then you get the flashback, especially if they do that stupid thing where it's like 24 hours earlier. Like that bugs me. You get that on TV all the time, and I hate it. It's my one of my absolute biggest pet peeves. But in this case, I think it works well. It establishes right up front that that he was a con artist, that it gives you his resume, right? It sort of sets up what you're going to see. They tell you this guy did these things and he got this much money and blah, 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 blah. But you know that he's on this TV show, so he's obviously been caught. And then you get the thing where it's like X number of years earlier, and you get to see DiCaprio playing a much younger version of that character. And I think it worked very well in this, that you knew the ending coming into it, because I think that helped. It's not like a movie like Goodfellas where you think you know how it's probably got to end, but you along the way you just see this person doing all these bad things, and you're like, oh my God, like, are they ever going to get caught? Is there ever going to be any redemption? And it's like with this one, you know up front, yeah, there's going to be some sort of satisfactory, well, you hope satisfactory conclusion where the quote unquote villain, if you can call him that, let's call him the person who's breaking the law, eventually does get caught and have to pay some sort of penalty.
I thought it was an interesting concept to explore because, this idea of fraud, especially back then, because it really starts out when he goes to high school and he pretends he's the substitute teacher. And I think a lot of it, his motivation was because he wanted to get back at that bully, right? But he realizes quickly, and like he says early in the movie, people believe what you tell them.
Yep.
And it's true. It really is. But I think it was a lot easier maybe back in those days because I feel like people were more trusting for the most part.
Yeah.
And there was always ways around the system. Like I like how banks, they wouldn't cash checks from other banks, but they would cash a check from the airlines. So he realizes this, and then he also realizes that people respect pilots. But really, what he finds out is they don't respect pilot. They respect the idea or the ideal of a pilot, right? So he just goes and gets the uniform, and he's off to the races. Even how he does that.
Literally, they respect the uniform rather than, much like with a lot of jobs, right? Like military, a lot of people will say, like, I respect the uniform, even though they show absolutely no respect for the person wearing the uniform. So no, and that's,
And how he gets that uniform, he just makes a call and he realizes, if I call up and just say I lost my uniform, they're not going to question it. Why else would you be calling, right? So, okay, here's your uniform. Away you go. And the other thing is he recognizes really early the importance of the attention to detail. Like, remember when he sees the girl and she's trying to pass the note at school? Yeah. And he's like, no, you got to put a crease in it. That's the first thing you do when you get it from your mom. You fold it. You got to put that crease in it. Like he really has a kind of a sixth sense about this kind of stuff. And then he starts getting better at grifting people as it goes on. Because his dad uses that necklace on the ground trick. Yeah. And then, he uses, his charm, I guess pun intended, to get Ellen Pompeo into bed, right? And then when he takes the decals off the model airplanes and he puts them on the checks, fantastic. Like he really understands the idea of just kind of just detail and how it fools people, and then how he can exploit all the loopholes and that the checks kind of move around and nobody ever notices and all that kind of stuff. But I want to touch base on the subplot in the film, which is really his family life, because at one point he comes home, he's young, and he catches his mom having an affair with James Brolin, right? And his parents get divorced. And he keeps mentioning it over and over, like he wants his parents to get back together. It feels like it's a kind of a plot device. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's meant to explain, his life of crime. He's from a broken home and all this, or maybe to make him more sympathetic. I don't know, but
well, I think it's in part done as a reminder to the audience that despite the fact that Leonardo DiCaprio, the actor who is probably at this point in his mid to late 20s, is really playing a teenager, and I think the fact, like what I got out of it was he's still a kid, he's still emotionally immature, and he has this idealized notion that, oh, my parents are like, although his parents are getting divorced, he thinks they can get back together, as kids often do when their parents break up. It's like, you think, oh, well, they're just going through a rough patch, they'll get back together. And it's like, he can't accept the fact that, his parents, they're broken up. There's obviously things going on that he's either not aware of or doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. And to me, that reminded me of the kind of behavior you see in younger children when their parents break up. It's like, oh, no, they're not going to be broken up forever. Mm-hmm. They'll eventually get back together. And that was what it did for me, is it reminded me that despite the fact that he's pretending to be an airline pilot, he's having sexual relations with these various women, he's pretending to be a doctor, he's engaged to be married, he's still a kid, he's still a teenager, he's still emotionally immature, and he still has this idealized notion that, oh, one day his parents will get back together. And in his mind, he's thinking it's just a matter of getting them helping his dad out financially. I'm going to get him a car. I'm going to put him in a nice suit. He's going to go and meet my mom, and she's going to forgive everything and come back to him, because that's obviously why she left. It was a money issue. So that was my takeaway from it.
No, that's a good point. There's one scene that kind of stood out to me. So remember when Tom Hanks was giving the slideshow presentation to the FBI agents about, how criminals are using counterfeit methods for checks and all this. And then the slide projector sticks. Mm-hmm. And I immediately thought, why is this happening? Like, why did it stop? And he's like, why is that thing stuck? Why is it not working? And I thought maybe it was just a mistake, when they were shooting the scene and they just left it there. And then I got thinking about it. I thought, Derek, you always said in the past that every scene in a movie is deliberate. Like,
especially in a Spielberg movie, there's no accident.
Yes, like you've always said, if there's a gun on the wall in an early scene, it better come back later in the movie. Otherwise, why is it there? So, for whatever reason, this scene stuck out to me. Do you remember the scene I'm talking about?
I remember the scene, yes. I honestly, I didn't give it much thought, but continue.
So the thing that I was thinking about was that maybe the FBI is using like broken down technology, while the bad guys are using state-of-the-art technology to commit frauds and crimes, and that's why they can't keep up with them.
Yeah,
they're playing different games.
Definitely, that's a good read. The idea of the metaphor for the lack or absence of resources. I think also to piggyback on that idea, Tom Hanks's character is clearly trying to educate his fellow law enforcement officers about some of these problems, and it's abundantly clear that everyone in that room couldn't care less. And later on, when he's got the two guys assigned to him, they both see it as like a punishment. Right. And they like how this is not a desirable aspect of law enforcement to go into. So I think you have to assume that all ties together with the criminals will do what the criminals do to take advantage of the fact that the law enforcement doesn't take their crimes seriously. And that's part of what led this particular criminal to be as successful as he was. Nobody was chasing him, or they weren't putting the resources into chasing him that they were to other people. And it's not until he racks up, what was it, $4 million or $2 million or something. Like when they go to see the mom and they finally figure out who he is, she's like, well, how much could it be? I'll write you a check. And he says it's like $1.5 million or something like that. And it's not until it reaches these exorbitant amounts that the law enforcement, unfortunately, that they finally feel they need to put some time, effort, and money into catching this guy, or he's just going to keep getting away with it.
One thing about Spielberg, too, he is a master of moving the camera.
Oh, yeah.
Like he zooms in on DiCaprio in one scene where he's in his apartment, and there's like things going on in all the other apartment windows. And then the scene in the movie theater when the camera moves across the audience and it goes right into him. It's remember in Jaws when he zooms in on Brody when he's sitting on the beach when Alex Kintner gets attacked. Like Spielberg is a master at doing this, and he keeps showing it over and over in his films. So I thought it was interesting, the one scene when he's impersonating all these people, impersonates a doctor, impersonates a lawyer and all this stuff. But he does get tripped up a couple of times, like when he's a doctor and he sees the kid with the broken leg.
Yeah.
And he goes into the janitor's closet and barfs, And then when he impersonates the lawyer and he says to the judge, he's like addressing the jury.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, this is a preliminary hearing. There's no jury. what the hell is the matter with you? Like, I thought that was kind of funny. But I have a question for you. Why does he peel the labels off everything? Like beer bottles, champagne, soda pop. Like, it's just a plot device.
I think it's a plot device. I think it's also, to me, that's a thing that I can remember doing as a kid. I think it's a quirk that a young person is more likely to do than an adult. And I think that's part of it. And obviously it's the plot device, because later on, the whole scene with the wallet where Tom Hanks opens up the wallet and it's got the labels. And then later on near the end, when he goes to the engagement party and he sees the wine bottle without the label. So I think it's more for that. But I think you could definitely read into the idea of that's like a little kid thing to do, is to peel the label off of the beverage. Or I think he did it off like the ketchup bottle and like everything, right? Anything that had the label. It's just to me, it's a thing a little kid would do.
I like the scene when he finally comes clean to Amy Adams, and he's like, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a Lutheran. I'm not a doctor. I'm not rich. I didn't go to medical school. I'm not Connors. And her reaction was, you're not Lutheran? Which it made me laugh. I thought that was pretty funny. And then I have a question for you too. Maybe it was just my TV settings, but was there German subtitles for every time they went to a different location? Because they put the name up on the screen of the place that they went to. Like, for example, when they went to France, like they put, this is in France. When I was watching on TV, they also had words above it in German. And I was like, is there something wrong with the settings?
I think it was just your settings. Yeah, I didn't have any of that. Now, and interesting though, I tried. So I have the DVD.
Okay.
And so I was going to watch it on the DVD. And when I tried to run it in my DVD player, it didn't work. And I was like, well, maybe it's because it's a Blu-ray player and this is a DVD. But I'm like, well, no, we did Ghostbusters a few weeks ago, and that was a
They're
DVD.
backward compatible. Fine. No play.
Yeah, and so I was a little. It's the only thing I could think of. I could not get. I tried on two different machines. It would not work. Is this DVD was a DTS, which was just one of the ways they were formatting DVDs for a little while. So I don't even understand how, like, there was that, and there was the super bit, and there was all these other little kind of quirks that DVDs had for a while. And I think it's this DTS formatting, whatever, that makes it non-backwards compatible. So it was kind of a bummer I didn't get to watch it on the DVD, but it was available on Amazon. So I managed to get it through the streamer. So all good in the end.
I streamed it as well. But my big takeaway was this movie was way too long. Like, maybe an hour too long. Like, it was crazy long. It was like 2.5 hours long.
I definitely felt the first hour was better than the second hour, as with so many movies. The origin story, I find the beginning of an origin story is always, in my mind, better than sort of what comes right after that. And this, like, again, I've mentioned Goodfellas already. Like, Goodfellas is clearly, like, there's two, Act 1 and Act 2, and the first part of that I found was a lot better in my mind, and I think a lot of people agree. Like, the first half is more entertaining. And then I found the same with this. I thought the second half sort of felt like it dragged a little bit. I felt it was a little too long. I felt the whole part, once he meets Amy Adams, like, that whole side of the story just seemed to me to take up a lot of screen time that didn't really add a lot to the movie. Unless we found out afterwards that he ended up going back to her and they got married. Like, okay, then I get why you've sort of set this up where he's legit fallen in love and the family has accepted him. And even after all these, he goes to jail. But that's not what happened. So it's like, I don't necessarily think you needed all that stuff. So I agree with you that I think it was a little bit too long.
And probably it's probably set up that scene though, when he gets her to come to Miami and then she does, but she's like in cahoots with the FBI, right? So he goes and recruits those good-looking college girls to be stewardesses. Yeah. And if there's one thing this guy understands, it's human nature, right? So he surrounds himself with these beautiful women, which completely distracts the cops and the FBI and airport security, and he just slips away. So I think, that was set up. I did like how the movie ended, though. I thought it was pretty good how he goes to work for the FBI and helps him solve the fraud and the counterfeit cases. And then it even says at the end, they ended up paying him millions of dollars every year to do it. As they said in Johnny Dangerously, a movie you hated, but remember, and they said crime doesn't pay. Well, it paid a little, I guess. But I thought that was kind of neat how he kind of went full circle and became became a good guy, I guess.
Yeah, and that definitely, that was one of the aspects of the movie that I enjoyed. Again, I love a movie about a con man, and it's all about those details. So any of the stuff that he, like, you could see him learning how to succeed at being a criminal. You saw him learn about, the checks were printed on certain kinds of paper, and they needed this certain kind of press, and they needed this certain kind of typeface. And you see him like forging document. He forges his medical diploma at one point. He's using the certain font. So it's like you see that he's learning all these little details. And then at the end, when they test him and they show him some examples, like he shows off. Oh, well, I could tell this was a fake just by touching it. It doesn't have the perforations. And then when they bring him into the FBI, he's explaining to them all these things he's learned, and in turn that'll help them catch these criminals or make changes. And the title cards at the end talk about how, like, a lot of the things that he's identified help revolutionize the legitimacy of checks and cut down on the forgery and various security measures that have been put in place. And it's those details of a story like this that I always find fascinating. And they're part of the things that I find appealing about a story about a con artist or a criminal or someone who can pull one over. It's that they learn all the little ins and outs, and it's those little details that other people don't pay attention to. But yeah, anyway, I want to just, before because it sounds like we're about to wrap this up, I want to go right back to the beginning for a minute. The beginning of the movie, the opening credit sequence. So for those who may not be as familiar, so it's the black and not black and white, but it's the monochromatic sort of animated cartoon sequence. It's got all the names, and it's got the little animatics of them, literally chasing them through the airports and stuff. And this is a tribute to a gentleman named Saul Bass. Chris, are you familiar with Saul Bass and his work?
He sounds familiar. I've heard Saul Bass.
Yeah, so he was a graphic designer. He designed movie posters and logos and title sequences like this one for dozens of movies, a lot of Hitchcock movies, and his movie posters are very well known, very memorable for their animated style. Like Vertigo is a really good example. I'm just looking at his entry here on Wikipedia, but he did opening title sequences for things like the original Ocean's 11 and West Side Story. It's a Mad Mad World. I'm just looking for a couple other big ones on here. Goodfellas, we've talked about that already. Things like this where it's broadcast news, where it's this style he's got that's very original, and it's unique. And when you see it, if you're familiar with his work, you immediately go, I know where that's from. And so the title sequence to this, unfortunately, he had died before this movie was done up. This is a deliberate and confirmed homage to his style. And so if you've seen it before, you sort of go, oh, this looks familiar. And if you are familiar with his work, you can really pick up on that. And you just sort of like, you nod your head and go, oh, I see where they went with this. And so it's again, Spielberg doing his thing, and Spielberg being a fantastic movie creator, knew about Saul Bass and his contribution to cinema over the year, and he did this homage to him at the start of this movie, and that's a nice little wink for those. So
rate this movie out of 10 for me, would you?
I'd probably give it an 8, between a 7.5 and an 8, but I'm going to lean towards an 8. I really enjoyed it. It's like, there's a lot to like about it, which we've talked about. It has a few hiccups, but no, I'd give it an 8.
I would go 6.5, only because I expected more from Spielberg, and I felt it was a little bit too long in places, and it wasn't quite memorable enough. It's not a movie I'd watch again. So. Okay,
but would you recommend it to someone who has not seen it?
Sure. If you had 2.5 hours of your life you wanted something to do, I guess I would.
Okay.
But I mean, again, it was just okay for me. That's just my thought. Anyway, on that note, let's have some
fun with Caveman.
Okay, Derek. So this movie it's really at its core a big cat and mouse chase, right?
Yes, it is. Yes,
but it's not the only movie that's kind of used this plot device. So here's what I'm going to do, Derek. We've done this format before. I'm going to give you the year and the synopsis. And all you have to do is name the film. Just keep in mind that the common thread this week is that all of these movies use a cat and mouse chase as a key part of the film's plot. Okay, so like one person's running and like someone's chasing them. Okay, all right, you ready?
Yep, fire away.
Okay, 1979. These are all easy. You're gonna get them all.
Okay.
1979. After a space merchant vessel receives an unknown transmission as a distress call, one of the crew is attacked by a mysterious life form, and they soon realize that its life cycle has merely begun.
That sounds like Ridley Scott's Alien.
Very good. Okay. 1993. A doctor unjustly accused of murdering his wife must find the real killer while being the target of a nationwide manhunt led by a seasoned U.S. Marshal.
Was that The Fugitive?
Told you, these are all easy. You're going to get them all. Okay. 1987. A team of commandos on a mission in a Central American jungle find themselves hunted by an extraterrestrial warrior.
Was that Schwarzenegger? That was Predator.
Okay, 1991. A young FBI cadet must receive the help of an incarcerated and manipulative killer to help catch another serial killer, a madman who skins his victims.
Oh, okay. I was like, where's this going? This is Silence of the Lambs.
Now, as a tip of the cap to my good buddy Luke Martin, Derek, here's a newer one for you. 2006. An undercover cop and a mole in the police attempt to identify each other while infiltrating an Irish gang in South Boston.
That would be the movie we did not too long ago, The Departed.
And here's another new one for you. 2007. It's only 14 years old. It's new in my eyes. Okay. Violence and mayhem ensue after a hunter stumbles upon a drug deal gone wrong and more than $2 million in cash near the Rio Grande.
Yeah, that was No Country for Old Men.
Told you, you're going to run the board on this one. They're easy. 1982, a veteran Green Beret is forced by a cruel sheriff and his deputies to flee into the mountains and wage an escalating one-man war against his pursuers.
Is that Stallone? That's it's not called Rambo. It's called First Blood.
Here's a softball one for you. 1988. An out-of-town police officer tries to save his wife and several others taken hostage by terrorists during a Christmas party in Los Angeles.
Oh, that's Die Hard.
I'm telling you, you're going to run the board on these, okay? 1971, a pair of New York City cops in the Narcotics Bureau stumble onto a drug smuggling job with a connection to France.
I'm going to take a wild guess based on your France clue and say The French Connection.
Yes, a bit of a giveaway. Okay, 1962, and remade again in 1991. A lawyer's family is stalked by a man he once helped put in jail.
Jeez. What year was that?
1962, and then it was remade again in 91.
Jeez. And I've never seen it. Is it Cape Fear?
It was Cape Fear.
I've never seen it. Never seen it. But when you said remake, I was like, oh, wait. Okay.
All right. 1971. A business commuter is pursued and terrorized by the malevolent driver of a massive tractor trailer.
Oh, is this that the first Spielberg one? It's I want to say it's Is it called Duel?
Yes, it was a made-for-TV movie. It wasn't his first film. His first film was Sugarland Express, but that was a made-for-TV movie. Okay, 1951, a psychopath forces a tennis star to comply with his theory that two strangers can get away with murder.
Again, I'm going to take a stab based on your clue. Was it Strangers on a Train?
One of my favorite films of all time, right there.
Would you have accepted Throw Mama from the Train?
I would have accepted Throw Mama from a Train, yes, because it was a remake of it. Okay, so you're running the board here. The last one, 1987. A cover-up and witch hunt occurs within the Pentagon after a politician accidentally kills his mistress.
Ooh, what was the year again?
1987.
1987. Jeez. Again, I'm just going to take a total stab in the dark here. Was it No Way Out?
It was No Way Out. Have you seen that movie?
No, never seen it. But I knew
I'm going to make you watch that.
I knew it was something military or government.
I'm going to make you watch that for a future episode because it's so good. See, I told you, easy ones. You ran the board for the first time.
Right, nice. First time in a long time.
Have we ever had anyone run the board here? I don't think he ran the board. Oh my God, that's great. That does not happen all the time. Congratulations. So, all right, next week, Derek.
In all fairness, those I don't want to say easy, but
yeah.
They were pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I tried to make them simple. All right, so our next episode, time now for another round of our pop culture fantasy draft. So our first ever fantasy draft was a few weeks back. It was on episode 188. And we held a fantasy draft where we each drafted a team from the year 1984. And the goal here is to draft a team of 3 movies, 3 TV shows, 3 songs, and a personal pick. And then we have a panel of esteemed judges who vote on our lists. I was victorious in our first draft. I just squeaked out a victory. It was 6-1 for me. Real nail biter. But anyway, so this time it's over to you to pick a year. So for next week, what year will we be drafting for our pop culture fantasy draft, Derek?
All right. I'm calling another audible. No, I'm just kidding. We are going to do it. Okay.
All right. So what have you got for us?
I've decided we're going to do 1981. And the reason we're going to do 1981 is I think we did a good job starting sort of right in the middle with
84.
1984. Yeah. Thank you. I was blanking on the year. And that's sort of right in the middle, right? We got about equal number forward and backwards. I think the ones from 84 and newer will be a little bit easier because I lived through that part. I was old enough to understand and remember. And I think a lot of the voters and the people that are listening to our show are sort of in our demographic. So I think that one's going to be a little bit easier to do the draft. These older years, 80, 81, 82, 83, I think that's going to require a little more homework. So I thought, you know what, let's get one of these tougher ones out of the way. And then when you pick, I'm going to, obviously you make the choice you want, but I'm kind of hoping you pick something a little later in the 1980s. So nice. We'll go with 81 for next week. And again, it's 3 TV shows, 3 movies, 3 songs, and then the wild card pick, right?
Yeah. It'll be interesting because our judges they might not have been around in 1981. There was something we did. I want to say it was in our first 10 shows of doing this podcast, where we did an episode called My Favorite Year. And the idea was that we kind of came to the conclusion that your favorite year in pop culture, if you really reflect on it and think about it, was the year that you were 11. And for whatever we explore the reasons for that, because that was kind of like when you're young enough to start watching movies and starting to watch TV shows and stuff. But it seemed to be a consistent thing that the conclusion we came to, that when you were 11, that was your favorite year for pop culture. And when I was 11, 1981.
Nice.
So this ought to be great. I'm really looking forward to do this draft. So next week we're going to come back. We're going to do our fantasy draft. We're each going to draft 3 movies, 3 TV shows, 3 songs, and a wild card of anything that we like, personal pick, from 1981, and then we're going to send it off to the judges, and we're going to get another winner. And whoever wins gets to take home the trophy of Funko Fonzie. Funko Fonzie is currently right here beside me. I'm touching him right now. He's on my desk because I won the first one, and I do not want to give up Funko Fonzie. Just because it's fun to say Funko Fonzie, and I like Funko Fonzie. So hopefully we're going to hang on to him. But I tell you what, until next week when we do our draft, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.